Donald Trump campaigned on viciousness toward immigrants, and we can all see how successfully he delivered on the promise to be incredibly brutal. We now know of at least 24 migrants who died under US custody. We also have a better sense of the squalid and unsafe conditions migrants are held captive in, which resulted in the spread of illnesses and death among them. Yasmin Juarez lost her 13-month-old daughter as a result of this brutality and spoke about it before members of the House.
The world should know what is happening to so many children inside these ICE detention facilities.
Medical records obtained by CBS News show that on March 5th of 2018, a nurse in Dilley, Texas, examined the little girl and found that she was healthy when she arrived. Last year, Juarez described the conditions at the facility to 60 Minutes.
There were too many people, too many children, and they put us in like cages.
And over the next 20 days, the girl did get sick. Once Juarez and her daughter were cleared to leave government custody, they joined family in New Jersey. Upon landing, the young mother took her daughter to the ER. But her condition got worse. The little girl spent 6 weeks in the hospital and was put on a ventilator. Members of Congress, as well as those in the gallery, wept as Juarez talked about the day Marie died, which happened to be Mother's Day in her home country of Guatemala.
When I walked out of the hospital that day, all I had with me was a piece of paper that the doctors made with Marie's handprint. That's all I had left, her handprints.
Juarez has filed a wrongful death suit against the federal government, stating that the conditions her daughter was kept in were unsanitary. In fact, we had a chance to witness the inhumane conditions when Vice President Mike Pence visited 2 migrant detention centers in Texas. Pence just stood there like a rancher examining a pen for cattle as migrant men in the standing room only cage begged for showers and described the minuscule amount of food they've been provided. But you can always count on Pence, or anyone in the Trump administration for that matter, to say you shouldn't believe your lying eyes.
What you saw today was a very clean facility where people were being detained indoors, and then you saw a temporary facility that was constructed because this facility is overcrowded.
Doesn't anyone else get frustrated by how often this administration insults our intelligence with these gross lies? Migrants don't die in pristine and humane detention facilities. While Obama's administration was far from perfect in implementing immigration policy, it is important to note that migrants didn't die in Border Patrol or ICE custody under his watch. Obviously, things are different with Trump. Pence's attempt to spin the reality of these detention centers was even called out by Chris Wallace, not a progressive, a staunch conservative on Fox News.
The reporters were able to take pictures of the McAllen, Texas Center that you visited with the vice president. They're up on the screen. This was the pool report. Almost 400 men were in cage fences with no cots. The stench was horrendous. Some of the men were sleeping on concrete. They began shouting and wanted to tell us they had been in there 40 days or longer. I understand.
I was right there.
I understand that President Trump is trying to stop the flood of people across the border, which contributes.
Trying to accommodate those who are here.
Which contributes to the overcrowding. But how does it help for the president to minimize the situation and say it's much better than what they had, or for Vice President Pence and Kevin Quirk's piece to say they're all being well treated when your own, I mean, you can look at the conditions there. It's a disaster.
To be clear, the Trump administration is right in saying there's a crisis at the border. There absolutely is a record number of Central Americans seeking asylum in the United States, and we do not have the infrastructure to deal with it appropriately. But our lack of preparedness lies squarely on the Trump administration, which had no problem declaring a national emergency for a non-emergency to divert disaster relief resources for his counterproductive border wall. It's also critical to outline how Trump has taken a legitimate problem and made it far worse than it needed to be. Instead of looking for real solutions to slow the flow of migrants seeking asylum or lessen the number of people held in unsafe detention centers, he has doubled down down on ignorant policies that are costing migrants their lives and Americans their tax dollars and their morality. Former Department of Homeland Security and US Customs and Border Protection employees outlined Trump's failures on immigration in a piece for Politico last April. They write that through misguided policies, political stunts, and a failure of leadership, the president has created the conditions that allowed the asylum problem at the border to explode into a crisis. Trump has actively made the problem worse by redirecting resources and attention to his irrelevant wall, antagonizing the people he needs to partner with to actually solve immigration problems, exacerbating backlogs and resource shortages by shutting down the government and announcing enforcement measures that cannot be sustained and which result in increasing numbers of migrants calling his bluff. Yeah. Remember that 35-day government shutdown earlier this year, thanks to Trump's childish behavior in demanding $5 billion for the border wall? That actually exacerbated the migrant crisis quite a bit. Also note that in fiscal year 2018, less than 15% of applicants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador were granted asylum, but only 1.5% of Central American family units apprehended in 2017 have been deported. The rest so far stayed. Since the Trump administration has done so little to speed up the processing of claims, it is likely that these families will be staying in the US for years. Indeed, the president's government shutdown over the border wall only worsened the immigration court backlog. We know the one way to speed up processing asylum claims would be to appoint more immigration judges. In fact, PBS NewsHour reported that in January of this year, there were roughly 800,000 immigration court cases portioned across only 400 judges. But Trump doesn't want to provide more judges to speed up the cases.
Ultimately, we have to have a real border, not judges. Thousands and thousands of judges they want to hire. Who are these people? We don't want people coming in. We want them to come in through a legal process like everybody else that's waiting to come in to our country.
But having judges hear cases to rule on whether or not to grant asylum is the legal way to do things. Trump even shared his disdain for judges and the rule of law in a tweet which reads, quote, "When somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back from where they came." So no due process, essentially. One other way Trump has exacerbated the immigration issue is through his overwhelmingly punitive approach toward undocumented immigrants. Previously, unaccompanied minors would stay with a sponsor as they await their asylum hearing. Oftentimes, the sponsors are undocumented themselves, and now they avoid sponsoring minors out of fear of retaliation. Obviously, this contributes to the overcrowding in these detention facilities. And finally, we need to talk about the root of this problem. Why are so many Central Americans seeking refuge in the United States? The overwhelming majority are fleeing violence in their own countries. So it would make sense to work with the governments of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to improve the conditions in those countries. But Trump has done the opposite, cutting hundreds of millions of dollars in aid. According to Reuters, congressional aides said the administration told them it would reallocate $370 million in aid to Central America that lawmakers had approved for fiscal year 2018 and suspend an additional $180 million Congress had approved for fiscal 2017. Rather than look for solutions, Trump has decided to take an approach that his administration believed would deter migrants from coming to the border. Ripping children away from their parents didn't work. Keeping migrants in squalid conditions didn't work. Dozens of migrants dying in US custody still didn't act as a deterrent. Because when people are desperately fleeing death and destruction in their own country, they'd risk anything for the possibility of safety. Trump is not a problem solver. He's a problem amplifier. But he is delivering when it comes to one thing. The private prisons who contributed handsomely to his inauguration and run many of these detention centers are getting rich off taxpayer money. The swamp is still swimming with the worst swamp monsters, and Trump is their leader. You never have to miss another episode of No Filter by ringing the bell below. You'll get notified whenever we publish something new. And don't forget to join TYT and download the TYT Plus app today. Download our TYT Plus app on your iPhone or head over to tyt.com/join.